Hi, Ted and Hona. Can you hear me?
Yep, Hona, I'm here. I can hear you clearly.
Okay, excellent. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today. We're going to be having a very informative discussion today about the current events, what's happening in Ethiopia, particularly the war on Amhara, how it will shape Ethiopia's politics and politics in the wider region. And so we invite you to stay with us. Please share the link to anyone who may be interested. It's set to begin at around 1 p.m., which is in about 7 minutes or 8 minutes. And so we're going to, until then, try and play some music. But this space will be recorded and will be made available afterwards for anyone who isn't able to attend. So I'm going to see if I can try and play some music. Okay, I think that brings us to about 1 p.m. That song, to those of you who are joining us now, was an older song from about 2019 and possibly even before that. And so a lot of the messages in that song, I think, are relevant to what's happening now, the current situation regarding Amhara's, the Amhara resistance, which are things we're going to get into. And so I think just to begin, we can start with some introductions. Maybe we can start with Ted. Ted, if you can, maybe say a few words, and then Hona, and then I'll go last before we start.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us to be part of this conversation about what's happening in Ethiopia, specifically as it relates to Amharas and also more broadly Ethiopia. My name is Teodros Terfe. I am the chairman of the Amhara Association of America, and looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Hona Mandafru. I'm a True Place Advocacy Director. Looking forward to the discussion about the ongoing war in Amhara region and what are its broader implications.
Hi everyone, my name is Robel Alemu, and I am Director of Communications for Amhara Association of America. Thank you all for joining us. So we have a very special and relevant space for you. We'll try and be very brief so we don't cut into any other programs. And so we're just going to jump right in. Just for those of you who are joining us, please continue to share the link. The space will be recorded and made available after for anyone who isn't able to stay for the entire session. And so why have we, decided to, have this discussion, which is very relevant? Well, as we all know, there's a very, devastating war happening as we speak on the Amhara people, waged by the Abiy regime. Many of you who have followed the Ethiopian medias will see that there's been fighting between the Fano and the federal forces in various parts of the region. Fano have taken large swathes of territory in the Amhara region, liberated many areas in which they've installed Fano administrations. And so this is part of the popular resistance, right? The popular resistance that evolved from the demonstrations that we saw even earlier this year in April 2023. And we saw a lot of things happen around that time, including the dissolution of the Amhara Region Special Forces. And this was to make way for this war that we're seeing right now. And so many areas have been liberated, including places in Wadla, Wagdi, Rayak Obbo, Lasta, Makit, Ibnat, Gondar Zuria, Dembia, Libo, Kamkam, and the list goes on. And some of this information I've also pinned above. And so as we're having this discussion, you can refer to some of the tweets above, which contain relevant information shared from the AAA team. And as we're seeing this unfold, we're also seeing that the National Defense Force, the NDF of Burhanu Jula, is collapsing. It's in disarray. Soldiers are deserting in various parts of the region because clearly they don't want to engage the Fano, which have a reputation of being very fierce fighters. We saw that in the Northern Ethiopia War. And you have the fragmentation of the military along ethnic lines. And so you have Amhara soldiers who don't want to fire against their own people. And so, this is becoming kind of an occupation situation where you have a population that sees these forces not as a pan-Ethiopian force, but as an invading force. And as a result, it's not something that they feel comfortable in themselves, the ENDF that is. And meanwhile, there are mass atrocities happening against civilian populations. We're seeing massacres, arrests of hundreds of civilians, actually thousands of civilians in various parts of the region. We're seeing that the military is also perpetrating rape as a weapon of war against women and girls, especially in areas where there's conflicts. And so there's this pattern where when there are military engagements and defeats of the federal forces, they're actually taking revenge attacks and using terror tactics to terrorize the local population. And so we're seeing the unfolding of mass atrocity crimes, war crimes being committed as we speak, with massacres in places such as the Debre Elias area, in Gorgora, and the list goes on. In terms of mass arrests, we saw this year an intensification of the mass arrest campaign that we saw last year, in which opposition figures, journalists, human rights advocates, professors, academics, medical doctors, lawyers, students, and the list goes on. Amharas from all walks of life being rounded up and imprisoned by the Abiy regime. And this is happening throughout the Amhara region, the Oromia region, in the capital city, and elsewhere in the country. And so these people are being rounded up in detention camps. They're facing torture, physical torture, psychological torture, in some cases sexual violence, abuses by federal forces, as well as Oromia regional forces. And so this is an epidemic that has been going on for some time, and we're seeing this intensify as the Abiy regime conducts its genocidal war on Amharas. And in parallel, we have the Amhara protests, but also even protests by farmers, because farmers, which are the backbone of the Ethiopian economy, particularly in the Amhara region, are not being provided the necessary resources to farm and produce food for the local population as well as for the nation. And so they're not being provided fertilizer, seeds, and this has led to a large spread discontent and protests by farmers from throughout the Amhara region, and in some cases even some confrontations between farmers and security forces. And so as all of this is happening, unfortunately, there is a noticeable lack of coverage from non-Ethiopian medias. And so these are prominent medias which previously were covering events very closely in Ethiopia, in 2020, 2021, 2022, but have now actually been providing less coverage, which is a disservice to what's happening. And unfortunately, a lot of the Horn of Africa observers, the analysts, the so-called experts are also not talking about the war on Amharas. And despite this, we're here to tell you that this fighting between the Amharas and Abiy's military has implications that will affect Ethiopian politics, but also will affect the entire country of Ethiopia, the Horn of Africa region, and even international politics. And so the ramifications of what's happening are not to be underestimated. These are going to have wide-reaching effects. And in today's space, we want to talk about not just the context, but also the current situation in Amhara region and the possible outcomes of the war between Abiy and the Amharas. And so with this, I'll allow my co-panelists to continue.
Thanks, Robert, for that introduction and setting for the context for our discussion today. And I guess a number of issues Robert raised, we will come back to them eventually as the situation develops. But today, I think we'll just give an overview and the framing of the situation on the ground. And I think it's important to kind of go back a little bit for what happened in the past few years, because this conflict that we're seeing in Amhara region is not a new one. It has been brewing for years. In fact, one can say it has been on the making for decades. because at the heart of the confrontation is, some of the questions Amharas have been fighting for decades, and actually the factors that led into Abiy himself to come to power. But if we start from the moment Abiy came to power, we all remember that despite the rosy picture he gave, and in his acceptance speech, one of the defining characteristics of Abiy's regime when it comes to Amharas has always been avoiding and undermining Amhara's questions, including those that led him to come to power. And by that I meant, the identity and border and justice questions in Walqait, Raya, and Caldera, and other places. So there was, he has been, avoiding the constitutional change demand that Amharas have been fighting for decades. The representation of Amharas in across Ethiopia, as we know, Amharas are subjugated in multiple regions, in Redor and Oromia and Benishangul-Gumuz. In all of these places, there's no universal suffrage, or there's no equal representation of people. It actually Amharas are not only minoritized politically, despite their large presence, but actually they have been on a constant in of receiving torture and a number of political prosecutions, arrests, displacements, and all that. So this question of representation of Amharas is not just for the sake of democracy or equal representation. It's actually have a life and death consequence on Amharas, and knowing that Amharas have been really fighting for proper representation of Amharas in areas outside the so-called Amhara region. The issue of Addis Ababa, we know how that has been, the center of contestation for decades. But actually, instead of answering that question, Abiy decided to let OPP annex Addis Ababa into Oromia, or parts of Addis Ababa into Oromia. But also, we know what has been happening in Oromia, the Amhara genocide that has been going on for decades, but that has been intensified since Abiy came to power. And we know the Oromo Hegemony project that the PP as a platform and as an institution is implementing throughout the country. All this have led into resentment against Abiy administration for years, and Amharas were probably one of the largest ethnic groups that have came out in public to demonstrate, to denounce Abiy's regime early on. So we've seen demonstrations against Abiy in 2019, 2020, and other years. So the resentment against Abiy has been going on. But I think the mishandling of the war and bringing the northern war, particularly to Amhara and Afar regions, and letting TPLF invade, destroy, and kill Amharas in thousands, and leading into sexual and gender-based violence against thousands of women. That, I think, particularly awakened Amharas into not only understanding the true nature of Abiy, but actually how he was he enjoys letting Amharas suffer, and his policy of subjugating Amharas is built on letting not only his region but also others prosecute Amharas and kill them. So that, I think, in a way was an important milestone where the resentment against Abiy kind of resulted into an open an open confrontation between some armed groups of Amharas and ANDF. Obviously, since then, there are governance issues, Abiy, like Robel mentioned, such as the fertilizers that have resulted in broadening the resentment base. So if you say, the politically awake Amharas were aware of what's happening to Amharas in Oromia and other regions, the political decision to deny Amhara farmers fertilizers really gave the rural part of Amhara to understand the intention to build hegemony and to kind of suppress Amharas, and that led into, I think, broadening of the resistance movement from urban areas to rural areas. But also the turning point, I would say, in this confrontation is the exclusion of Amharas from the Pretoria peace process. I think that was an important development because one, it kind of led into Prosperity Party, the Amhara Prosperity Party, to become baseless. Essentially, they Abiy essentially turned them into irrelevant puppets in the region, because throughout the war period, APP, for its own reason, amplified or tried to project itself as a true defender of like the identity and justice questions in Walkite and Raya, but the exclusion of Amharas exposed them. And that was also disrespectful for the Amhara community, because Amharas, as you know, have set up a negotiation team, a negotiation delegation team that was ignored by international observers, which led into what's happening in Amhara region. Yes, it's primarily designed by Abiy, but actually some of our international actors have also a role, because they forced Amharas to resort into armed struggle by denying them a seat at the table. But that exclusion kind of left Amharas many of our outstanding issues unanswered. Obviously, the accountability for the crimes committed during the war, the issue of Walkite and Raya, the ultimate resolution on Walkite and Raya, all these were left to be unanswered, and that forced Amharas to seek other ways of resolving the matter and ultimately defending the current Amhara administration in those areas. But then again, we witnessed another escalation of the tension when the Abiy decided to dissolve the Amhara Regional Special Forces. That was unconstitutional. As you all know, the Amhara Regional Special Forces are established by the Regional Council, and only the Regional Council can dissolve them. But more importantly, it kind of made it abundantly clear that Abiy is going into return Walkite and Raya back to TPLF, and the dissolution was an attempt to disarm Amhara so that they will not be able to resist whatever decision Abiy makes. So that led into widespread popular resistance that we remember. Several cities saw demonstration, and that led into crackdown against journalists, human rights defenders, politicians, and all that. And while all that is happening, the ethnic cleansing in Addis Ababa also intensified, and eventually that operation, the declared law enforcement operation by Abiy, really initiated the war, because after that, the NDF started to go after the Fanos, and the Fanos have no option other than defending themselves. So that have led into the continuous engagement that is evolving into a different scale or different point now. But I think before we go into the developments in the war, maybe let me invite Ted to talk about what's again for Abiy in doing this, or what's behind this Abiy war, failed war on Amhara region.
Thanks, Hone. I think you touched up on a lot of these points in terms of what is the incentive for Abiy to go after Amharas, and Robel has also touched up on it. Those of us within the Amhara movement have always been trying to raise the alarm to Amharas and the broader Ethiopians that Abiy is not a partner. He's not someone that can be trusted. That his ultimate goal was really the subjugation of Ethiopia, under the for the Oromuma project that he has always had, that he had always had a plan for this. This was something that early on when Abiy came to power, that a lot of Ethiopians were not receptive to listening to. Um, and but he showed himself early on when he was selected. He expressed his suspicion of the organized Amhara movement, and he really saw it as a threat to his power. And he did that in Bahardar, and when he in his first visit as a prime minister, and also on several different occasions. But I think there were many people who just gave it a deaf ear. And really, Abiy's ultimate goal is to destroy the capacity of Amaras to defend themselves. And he did that by dissolving and dismantling the Amara Special Forces, by going after the Fanos, killing and arrest and trying to kill and arrest the Fanos. Obviously arresting and intimidating journalists, politicians, any Amara dissenting voices, to take away the ability of Amaras to speak for themselves, to be a voice for themselves, within his reach. And we believe that the one of his ultimate goals, as agreed on with the TPLF, is to return the areas of Wolkayt and Raya under TPLF administration, but to have the current TPLF leadership to really to be his lapdog, in the same way that that he has Bahardar as leaders as his lapdog. But this is going to fail. The war that he has declared on Amaras is going to fail, and that's for many reasons. One, he made a huge mistake in terms of how he organized the military. At this present time, majority of Ethiopians, and particularly Amaras, do not see the military as a pan-Ethiopian military. They see the military as really an Oromo military, and you will now find many Amaras in the rural area who refer to this military as currently constituted as ONAG. You will hear them call this military as ONAG, equating it to the Oromo Liberation Front, our army. And so when they're referring to this military as ONAG, they're seeing this military as an outsider, and that's why Amaras feel that they are under siege by Abiy and the Oromo military. In addition, this military is really poorly trained and uncommitted, to the central government, and that's why you're seeing the lack of performance right now within Amara region, and that's why the Fanos have been victorious in almost every engagement with the military. But that also speaks to how poorly the military performed in the war in northern Ethiopia. In addition to that, just ineptitude leadership within the top brass of the military, and really across the entire government. Um, so, one thing I think is important to highlight, that you know the military was always retreating during the war in northern Ethiopia. They abandoned their positions. Thousands were captured. They deserted, and the military was ultimately saved by the Amara Special Forces, FANOS, the Afar Forces, and Eritrean Defense Forces. And the TPLF itself even admitted that the toughest fight that they had was against the FANOS slash Amara Special Forces and the Eritrean Defense Forces. This was an admittance by TPLF leadership. And it's not really something to overstate when we say that the TPLF was defeated, by the Fano and Amara Special Forces within the Amhara region, and completely weakened them, and the reason for their retreat back into Tigray. What we're witnessing is basically the same mistake that Abiy and his top military brass, the same mistakes that they did in the war in northern Ethiopia, replaying that in the Amhara region, and suffering the same type of defeat. And Abiy has no support. He has no support within Amaras in the region, Amaras across Ethiopia, in the diaspora. In fact, even a just a an observation within of APP, we'll see that he has lost even a lot of support in the lower and many of the mid-tier APP cadres, because they're at the bottom, just like with the regular people. They're getting the same information and the same news, and they're seeing also the losses that the military is incurring, and they understand what the consequences are when they're going against their people. And so this fight is really unfavorable for Abiy and the military. One, this is a popular resistance. It's not just a fight against the Fanos. It's all Amaras that are rising against Abiy. The Fanos, the Amhara Special Forces, when they were dissolved, they didn't join the army. They didn't join the military. Many of them joined the Fanos. Some of them themselves, as a collective, took arms against the military. Others went home. So what you have is you have a situation where you have the Fanos, Amhara Special Forces, who are experienced, who are battle hardened, fighting against this military that's ill trained, ill equipped, and uncommitted to the central government. And the Amaras who are fighting have a purpose and a reason to fight. They're fighting for survival. And this is a huge difference. In addition to that, it is also farmers that are now taking arms against Abiy. There are protests that are happening against the Abiy regime. So this is really an armed, a popular resistance across the entire region. It's not just one group of one group of people or one group of organized group in one area fighting against the military. Um, there's also really no area where Abiy's military is not being engaged. It's across the whole region, and that makes it much more difficult. Also, if we think about it, the Amhara region is much bigger geographically than Tigray. There's close to 30 million people within the region. It's very mountainous. It's the terrain is very difficult for the forces to navigate. It's very easy for the people who live there, for the Fanos, the Amhara Special Forces, to navigate around that area. They know it. It's their home, and they also have the support of the people. So, and many of there are also critical areas that the Fanos now have taken over, like for example Gashena and some of the other areas where these are logistically becomes very difficult for the military to maneuver. So this is a very, very difficult war for Abiy that he has taken on, and we believe ultimately it's going to lead to to his loss of power. And many within the APP, lower cadres understand this, and he's put him the APP's top leadership that he controls in a very precarious situation, because he's put them in a situation where they can't do anything because they have no support. He has completely delegitimized that political structure. And this is really goes to the heart of why many in the Western world, especially the Western diplomats and Ethiopian observers, have misunderstood the situation in Ethiopia, have misunderstood Amaras in Ethiopia. What is it that they want? What is their relationship with Abiy? And as well as with the government, and even really with the state. So many of these Western observers, let me just say, have completely misunderstood this. They really failed to pay attention to all these large-scale protests that were happening, anti-Abiy protests, before the war, demanding a halt to the Amhara genocide in Oromia, and for Abiy to be held accountable. This was happening before the war. This was being covered by Amhara media, Amhara organizations, activists. We were all being very critical. There were, Amhara organizations demanding for resignation of Abiy, for Abiy to be held accountable. This was ignored. There were many, Western observers and diplomats, and even some Ethiopians that believed that that Amaras were supporters of Abiy during the war, and this is really a complete misunderstanding of why Amaras were fighting in the war. This is far from the truth. The reason why Amaras fought in the war is because they were forced to fight in the war. They were drawn into the war because the TPLF invaded the Amhara region. Amaras had no choice but to fight in this war because they were invaded by the TPLF. on multiple occasions. There were areas of Wollo and areas of Wagamra that were under TPLF occupation for over 6 months. TPLF committed massacres, rapes of thousands of women, destruction of civilian infrastructure, of hospitals, schools, businesses, farms. And the Abiy's military was incapable of responding to the TPLF invasion. So Amaras had no choice but to organize themselves as Fanos and fight back against this invasion and these mass atrocities that were being committed by the TPLF. In addition to that, Amaras have always wanted to have the Wolkite and Raya areas under Amara administration. So when they were invaded, they had no choice but to defend themselves and also bring back the Wolkite and Raya under Amara administration, which they did. But this was really seen by many observers that Amaras were siding with Abiy, which was really false. Even during the war, there were many Amaras still protesting against Abiy with regards to the genocide that was happening in Oromia. So this is something now that many of them now are starting to understand because we've been, explaining to them, educating them, but also this narrative that Amaras were on the side of Abiy was also pushed by some other, Ethiopians who felt they could gain from this politically. Also, the other thing about this is that for many diplomats who were participants and supporters or stakeholders in the cessation of hostilities agreement, they don't want to admit this because then it would be an acceptance of a failure to understand the political situation in Ethiopia, and the fact that an acceptance that Amaras were not represented, that their interests were not represented, even though we were willing to participate in that process. They didn't think that Amaras would fight back, to this extent. They just felt that Amaras would accept the cessation of hostilities agreement and the status quo that they were trying to impose on Amaras. One of the things that we have been saying for a long time that this cessation of hostilities agreement was imposed on these parties, and it was also the process was it was a failed process that was not inclusive but exclusive of all stakeholders, and we warned that this is not going to lead to peace in the country, but in fact it was going to lead to more more fighting because not all the stakeholders were part of this process to bring about peace in the country. So I think I'll stop there and I'll turn it over to Hone, and maybe to talk about on in terms of where do we go from here? What are the possible outcomes and scenarios given the losses that the Abiy is facing in the Amhara region?
Sure. Thanks, there. And I think in terms of the Abiy-Amhara relationship, I think it's important to remember that actually ourselves triply called for Abiy to resign while the war was ongoing. So we've always made it clear that Abiy does not have the support of Amaras, despite the propaganda from other groups. And I don't think people that are really following the Ethiopian politics closely would miss that. It's just there's a keen interest to amplify propaganda coming from certain groups as facts, and that's why this perception kind of lingers around. And I think some chose to believe that. So I don't think any serious observer on Ethiopia would miss the calls for us to calls by us for Abiy to resign, the multiple rounds of protesters in the region and all that. So let's make it clear, or it should be clear, that the contestation or the confrontational relationship between Abiy and Amaras was always there, and it has been well recorded by those who are good enough to do their job diligently. In terms of the region, the fighting Amharas, fighting in the north, in the northern Ethiopia war, we should remember that actually the first offensive TPLF, when they started the war, they attacked Amhara region. And therefore the Amhara special forces then had to respond to TPLF's attack around Gondar front. So not only TPLF attacked, the northern command to start the war, actually at the same time they attacked the Amhara region, making it necessary for the Amhara region forces to respond. But then, as we all remember, Amhara region forces and the Fanos didn't go into proper Tigray. So the fight that happened in Tigray region is between NDF and other forces. But I mean, obviously, later on when TPLF invaded Amhara region, there were multiple rounds of fighting between Amhara special forces, the Fanos, and all that. So there's no ground to confuse Amhara's engagement with TPLF as a support for Abiy. Again, that is very clear why Amharas had to fight and what were their reasons. And we have always, Amharas have always said, the ending the sort of apartheid regime in Walqait and Raya that was imposed by TPLF was imperative, and that is not something we said during the war. That's something that we said for years, and that's something why Abiy came to power from the very beginning. Another point I want to make is the Western misunderstanding, as Ted said. I think some might misunderstood it, especially if they are not closely following up what's happening in Amhara region, but many are trying to suppress information about what's happening in Amhara region because they are implicated in what's happening in Amhara region, as I said. For instance, those who are involved in shaping up the Pretoria peace process, they were told, they were warned, the exclusion of Amharas would lead into extension of fighting in Ethiopia. They chose to ignore that. So now, they are trying to suppress what's happening in Amhara region as a way of covering up their failure. So I think it is more than misunderstanding. It's an active project of suppressing information to portray, success in making peace in Ethiopia, because that will save face of a number of diplomats, but also it will enable Abiy regime to get the support it's badly begging from Western institutions, including financial institutions, but also some countries would like to project whatever peace agreement they think they have achieved in Pretoria as a success of their administration as well. So there are it's more than misunderstanding. I think there is an active attempt to suppress information on what's happening in Amhara region. In terms of the possible outcomes, I think for us to understand the possible outcomes, we need to appreciate the unique nature of what's happening in Amhara region. It's not a confrontation between government and insurgents in a remote area that's in a border area that like what happened in Tigray or what's happening with Oromo Liberation Army in parts of Oromia. This is happening at the center of the country. It's like a number of lines that connect Ethiopia's regions goes through Amhara region or are very close to Amhara region. So this is a conflict that's happening in central Ethiopia, both geographically but also close to the center of power. But also, this is a mix of civil resistance and armed resistance. So there are farmers that are engaging NDF in active direct confrontation, but there are multiple tactics that are being deployed across the region, including undermining the region's attempts, leaking information, giving intelligence information, resisting peacefully, demonstrating peacefully, and all that. So it's a combination of a number of things, obviously, and that makes it difficult for Abiy. It's also, I think, close to a number of regions that are bordering foreign countries, so that also makes it a little bit difficult for Abiy to impose sustainable siege. Also, that's what they're trying to do in the region. But all in all, I think, given that this is a conflict that has been brewing for a long, and Amharas have fought in the past against TPLF, against Abiy regime as well. It's this popular resistance will be very difficult to crush by ANDF, and obviously the ANDF, as Ted has mentioned earlier, it's a divided force. It's a force that is struggling to keep its members, because it's every day, people are deserting in groups, and that's why everywhere they are camped. If there is an NDF camp in any part of Amhara region, there is day-to-day searching of people, or like searching of exit and incoming transporters to these towns, because as they openly admitted, there are like several soldiers living in NDF. So this will be difficult to win for Abiy, and therefore, the popular resistance will win one shortly. I think the sooner or later. I think the question is about like what impact this ongoing war will have for the region and for Ethiopia more broadly. The popular resistance winning would mean, obviously, there will be an opportunity to forge a new political settlement in Ethiopia, and that would mean, renegotiation of like what Ethiopia should mean and should look like, and how the administration would look like. And Abiy and TPLF and other forces implicated in genocide, such as the Oromo Liberation Army, will be held accountable. And that's, I think, one of the major implications of this war. It's gonna reset Ethiopia because the discussion is the kind of discussions that will be on the table will be completely different from the ones we saw in Pretoria. Because in Pretoria it was a power sharing deal. But if the popular resistance of Hamas against Abiy wins, then the kind of questions that will be discussed will be different. And Abiy and those supporting Abiy in this war they know this, and that's why they're determined to make sure Abiy gets the necessary support to subjugate Amharas. So in a way, this is a war against Oromo hegemony, and this is a war from Abiy's side intended to subjugate Amharas for once, and to make sure no one dares to challenge his power. But if we have learned anything from the recent war or from the past 3 decades, anyone who tried to subjugate and kind of impose its own apartheid system eventually will lose, and that is for sure. But also there's a danger of protracted war, because as we have said, this is to a certain degree a war sanctioned by foreign powers. They want to see Abiy win for a number of reasons we've explained. Some of them just for pure business interest, others for a much more sinister agenda. But I think that will lead into a protracted war, which will mean Amhara region will become ungovernable, and Fano will essentially hide to administer Amhara region, and Abiy will try to control the rest of the country. And that would mean, without the pressure from Amharas, the Oromos would essentially, the Oromo elites would have a free opportunity to subjugate other groups they have targeted as part of their Oromoma project. These are like the Guragis and Siddharthas and others. They will try to seize this opportunity to Oromize the southern Ethiopia as they have always wanted, and that is very another consequence of this war, and how, if it is protracted, it might shape the other part of Ethiopia. Obviously, there's an attempt to regionalize this conflict. We have seen, the recent war talk about like port and all that, and whether that is, I don't think that's the real agenda. I think the real agenda is to kind of elevate Abiy as a king of Horn of Africa, and also make sure he is seen as a loyalist to the West, and also try to get financial loan and credit from Western powers by making sure Ethiopians die in senseless wars. So this might lead into other countries coming into play, but also, dismembering of Ethiopia. Essentially, with a protracted war, Ethiopia would become, partitioned into different groups taking control of different parts, and that will lead into instability, not just in Ethiopia, but the whole region. And that obviously, if the war is protracted, the other parts of the country will also be impacted, because as you all know, about 60% of staple foods that are used by many Ethiopians came from Amhara region. So farm production will decrease, and that leads into famine and general food shortage across the country. There's also a small chance of negotiated settlement, but this is unlikely because, as I said, this is a war. Abiy has no legitimate reason to wage this war on Amhara, but his intention is to please the TPLF and the Oromo nationalists by subjugating Amharas. So this group doesn't want a political settlement. They want, the NDF, the Oromo National Defense Force, to subjugate Amharas. And because of that, I don't think Abiy has a political space to negotiate with Amharas in a true phase and in a kind of genuine desire to form a peace. And that makes it difficult for any negotiated settlement. And that's what the current attempt is by APP calling for negotiation with Fano shows. Like, it's intended to use negotiation as a way to buy time and go after the Fanos. If there was a real intention, that should have come from federal government. But even then, there are complications. There are certain things Samaras would not set as negotiable, so that makes it difficult for a negotiated settlement. So overall, all the scenarios would tell us, one, this war is going to be very devastating and will shape Ethiopian politics regardless of how it will end. Second, there is a real danger for a genocide in Amhara region to happen, because one trend we have already observed is when the Oromo NDF loses, they resort to killing civilians. That's what they did in Gorgora. They suffered casualties, then they launched heavy military against civilians in a town, and they killed more than a dozen people in just a single attack. This tells us that as Abiy's forces lose, they will continue to scale up their attack against civilians, and this implies that the genocide that has been happening in Oromia region and other parts is likely to be extended into Amhara region. But for Amharas, one way or another, they have been victimized. They have been victims of genocide, and it's inevitable. It's inevitable for them to resist Abiy at any cost. But I think we should also raise alarm about a possible mass atrocities in Amhara region as NDF forces continue to lose in those areas. I'll stop there, I guess.
Thank you, Hona. And I think at this point, it's worth getting into what we can expect from the various stakeholders.
Robel, I'm just going to jump in here real quick. Can you hear me?
Yes, Ted, we can hear you.
Hona, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Ted, and Robel also hears you.
Okay, all right, perfect. Okay, I think, it's really, important that, everyone understands that, the best scenario, the best outcome that we can have is, the Amharas becoming victorious and Abiy, losing, and then so that finally then all Ethiopians can come together and to discuss stuff like what type of Ethiopia do we want? If this is going to be a protracted war, it will most likely bring in regional powers as well as those not just neighboring powers but also regional powers, and this can go on for a very very long time. And if this happens, it as Tony was saying, it's not only going to potentially reconfigure Ethiopia, but it could also reconfigure the entire Horn of Africa. Amharas are a very very large population. The Amhara region is close to the population just itself, just that region is maybe 5-6 times the size of Tigray. But when you add all the Amharas, within Addis Ababa and other parts of Ethiopia, it's close to like 50 million. And so this war will encompass all of Ethiopia. And when it becomes protracted, it can potentially reconfigure the entire Horn of Africa. There's a potential for new states emerging, and the states that currently exist may not exist in the near future. And that's why the best outcome for this is Abiy losing this war, and then we keep this internalized, and for Ethiopians to have that conversation amongst themselves, and then also for finally for Ethiopians to have true justice and accountability for the crimes that have been going on for nearly 3 decades. But I just wanted to make sure that people understand that this war here right now that's going on can go much broader, especially when you take into account what's happening is the wars that's happening in the neighboring countries. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted. Hona, was there something you wanted to add as well?
No, you can go ahead, Robert.
Okay. So I think at this point we've discussed, what's been happening in Ethiopia, provide some context, and then went into a little bit of analysis. Oh, is my voice not coming through?
Ted, we can hear Robel. I think it's the issue, but I'll be, yeah, I'll be, yeah. Okay, you can just mute yourself.
Okay. So I think at this point we've talked about some of the context behind what led us to where we are. We talked about what's happening in the war on Amhara. We talked about the impact that this war is going to have on Ethiopia and the impact that it's having, abroad. So beyond Ethiopia, rather. So to the Horn of Africa and to the African continent. So I think at this point it's worth talking about what expectations we have from the various stakeholders, and these include the external observers, but also the diaspora itself. So the Amhara, the Ethiopian diaspora, and how they can contribute and be actively engaged in what's happening. And so when we talked about what was happening, one of the key points was that the Amhara Prosperity Party is, not a party that's actually there to govern the Amhara people or to provide government services. It's rather an extension of this apartheid system that is in place to actually carry out the orders of the dominant party, in this case, the Oromo Prosperity Party and Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. And so because of this, there's a lack of diplomacy. There's a lack of, protection of civilians. There's a lack of a lot of things. And when it comes to diplomacy, this means that we as Amhara diaspora have to be you have to spearhead those duties. We have to be basically providing some of that service on behalf of our people. And in this multipolar world, there are a lot of eyes on Africa. So wherever you are, wherever your home country is, whether you're in the United States, whether you're in Canada, whether you're in Europe, Australia, and so on and so forth, there are opportunities to engage with diplomats, with neighboring countries, and then, there's a lot of countries who have a stake in Ethiopia, and international institutions such as the African Union, the United Nations, and we can create pressure on these countries and institutions to engage the Amhara communities and leaders in a positive, understanding, and sympathetic way. We can provide information. One of the core activities of AAA has been producing human rights reports using our team of experts on the ground, our investigators on the ground, who can provide accurate fact-based information compared to some of these organizations who have a lot of funding but aren't able to actually report from the ground. They don't have staff in Ethiopia who are able to do some of these duties. And so, this is an opportunity where, we can be leaders. And for example, there was the recent Diaspora Peace Conference, which, there are updates on AAA social media where you can actually go and see some of what happened. And, there's activities and initiatives happening all the time. And so on that note, it's also important to, utilize your civil duties. If you're an American citizen, for example, there's upcoming elections in 2024. That's where you can make an impact. You can run for office. You can, find out what different representatives have on the table, what their policies are, what their platforms are, and you can stay engaged so that we have people in office who can look after the interests of our community, because our community is not to be underestimated. It's a very sizable diaspora, and is really the dominant diaspora in the Ethiopian apparatus. So, for example, we have this Amhara Political Action Committee, or Amhara PAC. And this was historic because this was the first Amhara PAC, or the first PAC of any Ethiopian organization. And so this is a vehicle that can be used then to, influence how politics is conducted in a way that favors us. So I invite people to check that out. And for the international observers, for the human rights institutions, for the medias, for the policymakers, it's important to understand that the war on Amhara can't be ignored for the reasons that my co-panelists Tedros and Hona raised. And so, ignoring what's happening will have repercussions not only for Ethiopia, but for the whole region. So when we talk about peace and stability in the region, this crisis can reshape the entire Horn as we know it. It can create new countries. It can change dynamics. It can cause a lot of ripple effects that could have international repercussions. And so those who ignore Amharas now could potentially find themselves being outsiders on the geopolitics of the Horn in the future. And so, this is really important. And it's also, there's a role for the Amhara diaspora, once again, to take charge in shaping the narrative. This means, being able to comment on what's happening, sharing your stories, talking about what your families are experiencing, what you've seen, what you've experienced. And this is how we can personalize what's happening, because it's one thing to talk about the numbers, but it's another to actually go beyond that data and actually discuss the human element, how people's lives are being affected by this genocidal war, because the genocidal war is being waged against civilians. These are innocent people, men, women, children, elderly people who are being singled out and shot and looted and facing all types of atrocities. So it's our duty to be a voice for them. And for the human rights organizations and non-Ethiopian media, they need to break their silence. So these organizations and medias need to investigate and report on human rights atrocities, irrespective of who the perpetrators are, who the victims are, because you can't claim to stand for human rights when there's a selective nature in the reporting, when there's a bias. And there's been this longstanding trend of atrocities and political crises affecting Amharas being neglected. And there's efforts underway to change that from organizations like AAA, from other Amhara organizations, but this is resulting in these organizations losing credibility. And so this is going to have longstanding implications as well. And so this does not help Amharas. It doesn't help Ethiopia. It doesn't help the intended goal of these organizations. So there's a need to for these organizations to not see Amharas as an obstacle or as a threat or as whatever it is, there's a need to see them as potential partners, because Amharas also stand for, they want to see stability, they want to see peace, they want to see these things being restored to Ethiopia, their homeland. And so this can be a very two-way and mutually beneficial relationship, I think. And for Amharas overall, again, perseverance is needed. As Amharas, we have to understand that this struggle has just begun. It's a new struggle. The movement is new relative to other movements in Ethiopia's history. And so we need to be patient, but we also need to be active. We need to be engaged, because now it's clear what our goal is. It's to end the genocide, to ensure, the proportional representation of Amharas in power. And Ted mentioned, we're talking about upwards of 50 million people. 50 million people need to have a seat at the table that's proportional to their numbers, to their contribution to the formation of the Ethiopian state. And so genocide, subjugation, persecution cannot in any way be tolerated. It cannot in any way be normalized. We cannot have a country that is built on ethnic apartheid, that's built on Amhara-phobia. It just doesn't work. It's not seen anywhere else in the world. This is a system that's been imposed with a malicious intent in place. And so Amharas have to be willing to make this sacrifice across the globe. We have the movement on the ground. We have people very courageous freedom fighters that are sacrificing themselves, that are risking their lives. And we in the diaspora especially have a duty to acknowledge that, to respect that, and to understand that, without facing those same risks, there's an onus on us to support that, and to be part of the change that we want to see. It's not just about consuming the medias. It's not just about the awareness of what's happening. We have to go beyond that. We have to be active in our communities, and that's where the Amhara organizations have made a very historic impact. We're slowly becoming one of the world's most organized and most influential diaspora communities. And so that's not an easy thing to say. This is something to be proud of. And just because we don't see the change that we want to see immediately doesn't mean that these organizations are not effective. These things take time, but we need to be part of the change we want to see. We have to be constructive. We have to be patient. We have to support the organizations working for us, the initiatives that are working for us. And so as this movement grows, there's going to be influence felt in the geopolitics of the Horn. And so slowly we're going to end the existential threat posed against Amharas. We're going to get accountability for Amhara genocide. And for those of you who have been supporters of AAA, just please continue to support. You can find updates across our social media, across Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Telegram, and you can also donate financially, regular donations, by visiting www.amharaamerica.org. At this point, if my co-panelists Ted or Hona have anything to add, I'll give the space to them.
I don't have anything to say at this point, Well, maybe we can take a couple of questions from people. As we said in the very beginning, this is going to be a brief space discussion, considering as an eventist, but it was important we kind of provide this update and also share what our take on the development is. So maybe we can take questions if there are any. If not, we can say final words and close it.
Okay, excellent. And I think Ted is having some audio issues. I hope he can hear what we're saying. But yes, if anybody has any questions, you can raise your hand or very brief points, and we'll give you a chance to speak. We just ask that you identify your name, where you're coming from, and any organizational affiliations. Please be brief, and we'll give everyone a chance to speak. For those who are not able to attend the entirety of the space, it will be recorded. So please look for that. It will be made available, so you can share it with anyone that's interested. It'll be uploaded also to our YouTube, and it'll be made available on there as well. And so I think I see somebody who's come to the stage. If that's Addis Ababa, please, you can unmute your mic and take the floor.
Okay. Hello. My name is Serai. I have just a question for Ted. How do you see the new ambassador, the American ambassador to Ethiopia, Mr. Messinga, since they have a relationship with African cause before, and I'm wondering how do you see the ambassador assigned to Ethiopia with Amhara cause?
Roman, can you hear me?
Yes, there was actually a question posed to you. Can you hear us?
Yes, my mic is working now.
Okay. Do you want to answer that question now, or do you want to come back later?
I can answer it now. So actually, it's so the new ambassador to Ethiopia that's just been confirmed, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Irv Masinga, is someone that we have met several times. He's the number 2 in the Bureau of African Affairs. The first, I think, was 2 years ago, the first time that we had reached out, met with him as AAA. We had a very good conversation with him. Then we requested another follow-on meeting where we invited the leaders of all the Amhara organizations here in the U.S. to meet with him directly, so that he can hear not just from the leaders with AAA, but all the leaders within FANA, the Federation of Amharas in North America. The one thing I can say about him is that he is a listener. He is a diplomat, but he is a listener. He will sit there and listen. He's not antagonistic. He's not dismissive like we've seen other diplomats being, in terms of like hearing Amhara issues. He's going to want to. He's going into a very difficult situation in Ethiopia right now. Obviously, there is the incentive to keep hold this imposed agreement, that the cessation of hostilities agreement, and PDAS Masinga understands how we feel about this cessation of hostilities. We have told the State Department that this agreement did not cease hostilities, and it did not silence the guns. The guns against Amaras in Amhara region has not been silenced. So we have already reached out to him, requesting for a meeting. They were waiting until he was officially confirmed to schedule the meeting. They were holding off on meeting with diaspora groups until he was officially confirmed. Now that he's officially confirmed, we're expecting to meet with him before he departs to Ethiopia. What I, it's the only thing I can say is that we have met with PDAS Masinga a few times. The conversations were very frank conversations from our side. He is a seasoned diplomat. He's going into a tough situation, but we expect him to be someone that will be willing to at least listen to us. And it's good that we have someone going there that at least that has met with the diaspora organizations. And one of the things that we want to do is make sure that when he goes there, he meets with Amhara leaders that are in tune with the situation in Ethiopia and what's happening, so that he gets accurate information with regards to what's happening between the fight between Amharas and the Abiy administration. So once we have that meeting with PDAS Masinga, the ambassador Masinga now, we'll brief the community on how that meeting went.
Excellent. I think we're going to see if we can have anyone else come up. I don't see any other requests. Maybe Ted and Hona, you can check as well. If there are no other requests, we can maybe move to close the space.
I don't see there, so perhaps we have addressed people's questions already. Maybe I guess we can go ahead and close. But just to give a final kind of words on this, I think for me that people need to understand that this is a war intended to subjugate Amaras. As Ted mentioned from the very beginning, Abiy was obvious in his desire about organized Amara movement and how he's scared of it. And since then, we didn't go into details about how he try to make sure there is no organized leadership in the region by constantly replacing leadership. And he went after, people that he thought will eventually mobilize Amaras. So there are one thing that Abiy has done over the last 5 years is make sure Amaras are not organizing as fast as he could, or as we could. And I think he always knew that, for him to stay in power, he has to subjugate Amaras, and this is about ultimately keeping Amaras out of picture, out of sight, out of politics, and out of survival for him. And the Amaras at this point understand that, and that's why we're talking about popular resistance. That's why we are scared of the possible atrocities that will continue, and we have already seen this. As I mentioned what happened in Gorgora, but also something worth mentioning is what happened in Debre Elias monastery, where hundreds were killed, and Abiy, obviously at this point, I think everyone knows how the NDF is very undisciplined bunch of commanders that would attack anyone, any institution, including a religious institution. So it's going to be a very dangerous situation, in which thousands of people are already arrested, but the casualties, civilian casualties, could be even much higher in the coming period. So it's very concerning. Obviously, the regional implication is this is also a war of whether by design or by consequence will eventually dismember Ethiopia. And this is something some of the politicians have always said, the moment Amhara started to fight the center, the country will be in danger. Perhaps that's coming to fruition. We see. I'm not saying that is what they've been saying, or the people who say this were right, but I think right now the consequences of this war will likely be further disintegration of the country. It's already a weak country. It's already a country that's hanging on a thread, but this might be the last straw to disintegrate Ethiopia. So I think everyone should understand the stakes, not just for Amharas, but for their own. If you are an Amhara, this is in a way a war against probably your desire, your safety, and your visions for the region, and therefore it's imperative for Abiy to be held accountable. And not only this one, there are multiple reasons we have seen for Abiy to go. There's the genocide that's happening in the region, but also since Abiy came, the situation in the region has deteriorated further. And for Amaras, we've already said that any peace, any stability, any justice in the region would start the day Abiy is out of the picture. Peace will not be maintained when you have someone that thinks human lives are disposable in his chess game of making sure there's always fighting in the region. So it's imperative for people to understand that the Abiy's resignation or is not something that we ask just because Maras don't like him. It's because we truly believe that he is a source of disstability. He is a source of instability in the region, and bringing justice and stability in the region would start by taking him out of power. I'll stop with that.
Thank you, Hona. I see that we had just a couple of requests, and so I've allowed the people to join the stage, although I don't see one of them. So maybe we can provide an opportunity for Dawit to pose a question. Dawit, if you can please start by identifying your name, location, and any organizational affiliations, and then I'll provide the same opportunity for IMO?
Actually, I don't have any affiliations. I represent myself. I haven't spoken in a while. I just thought it'd be appropriate to just kind of step up and just say a couple. Um, there is, a famous saying that the truth will set you free, and I think it's time for a lot of people to reflect and kind of ask ourselves, what is the truth? Someone, these past 18, 24 months, a lot of us have felt betrayed. A lot of us have felt like, what is going on? And we have a lot of questions, and people want to get to the bottom of what is the truth and who is the arbiter of this truth. And on top of this, when you lay I think it was Earl Bell who rightly mentioned about the geopolitics and this new world that's developing in front of our eyes in real time. There's going to be some definite repercussions on the Horn. uh, Maps are truly being realigned, and if we don't recognize this, then we will only have ourselves to blame down the road. If you look at what happened during World War II, literally half of Europe was redrawn, and we don't know where this conflict ends. It seems like, on 30,000 foot up, uh, you overlay that the Russia African summit. There is some realigning happening, um, and I think the victor of this conflict is going to be setting the power distribution for the next 75 years. That's exactly what happened during World War II. So this has repercussions for all Ethiopians, including Amhara. You know, and many Amhara, they have been very, very reluctant to even identify as me being one of them. I've never been on a stage where I've identified myself, and I'm like, maybe perhaps time. And now it's time to discuss this serious issue. I know a lot of us have been afraid to speak out for quite some time, and as sad as it is, a lot of people are coming to realize this truth. The past 18 to 24 months have been very, very trivial. A lot of us have been looking, kind of inside and trying to discover ourselves, and what is our influence, what is the power, and it's been an interesting time. So it's kind of humbling and appropriate to see this kind of level of organization across the board, and it's an interesting time. So thanks for the few minutes. I really don't have any questions, but thanks.
Thank you, King Dawit. We also had IMO on the stage, but I think he might be experiencing some technical challenges. But yeah, from what I understood, King, I think you didn't have a question per se, but you were just providing some commentary on some of the things that we said, and I think what you shared was very profound and articulate, especially the comparison with World War II, because I think what's happening in Ethiopia, well, maybe I can start with the identity thing. What's happening in Ethiopia is a challenge for Amharas because many Amharas were not raised to identify with their Amhara heritage first. I think there was this tendency to, be raised as proud Ethiopians, and perhaps there isn't a lot that clashes between the two, but I think there was also this tendency to feel gaslighted by groups that organized as Ethiopians, and perhaps I would call them the Abiyist camp or the fake Ethiopianists. But there was this camp that essentially was dominated by a lot of non-Amharas, but really this group that had this political or maybe this ideology that was regarding Amharas as oppressors, and very much resembled, what we saw from the camps that we have, come to be in contention with a lot of the time. So, I think with time, a lot of people have begun to see the light, and it's not just Amharas; it's other communities too that are beginning to see the Abiy regime for what it really is, and really, it's a regime that's imposing Oromo hegemony, right? And it's imposing this Oromo fascism, and I think, you know, it's not to say that that reflects on the entire Oromo community, but this is a group that does believe in Oromo supremacy, and it does want to impose subjugation against Amharas. And it's important for us to understand this. And when I talk about other communities, We've seen how the Oromia regional government forces, the Oromo Special Forces, and even the Oromo Liberation Army, how they've exported their genocidal violence from the Oromia region to neighboring regions on all sides. We've seen this happen in Benishangul, we've seen this happen in Gambela, we've seen this happen in the southern region to the Gurages, who are now facing a crisis. We've seen this happen to the Afar, we've seen this happen on all sides, and of course the Amhara. And so I think it's very unfortunate to see this, but at the same time, now we've seen this rise in Amhara-centric thinking, not out of a parallel to what they believe, but really something that's born out of this struggle for existence. Right? This is the Amhara are facing an existential threat, and they have organized to combat that, to challenge that. We've seen the Amhara resistance since 2016 on a wide scale, opposing the TPLF led EPRDF regime. And now there's this also this Fano movement that's part of this Amhara resistance that's expanded and it's grown because the problem has just come to the doorsteps of Amharas from all walks of life, regardless of where in Ethiopia they live. When it comes to the genocide, when it comes to the economic marginalization, political marginalization, the apartheid, the even travel restrictions in your own country. You can't even travel into and enter the capital city. So, Amharas, I think, have been consistent in what they've been preaching compared to some of the other groups. And I think what we're fighting for, what the Amhara people are talking about, is really democratic freedoms. They're talking about equity. They're talking about freedom of press. These are basic core human rights issues. And what's becoming clear is that at the end of the day, the change that we want to see can only be ushered by our own people. There's not going to be any savior that comes in because they care about human rights. That's just not the reality that we're facing. So it's up to us to strengthen that and to be a core for our people to talk amongst each other, to share our opinions, our views, and to support Amhara's organizing, because this is really a matter of existence. So I really appreciate, King, your insights, and I hope you'll join us in the future for other discussions, and you can share similar insights. And with that, I just want to provide an opportunity for my co-panelists, Ted and Hona, if you have any other thoughts to add them. I don't see any other requests, so I think we can wrap up after that.
I don't see there, so maybe I'll invite Ted to kind of do sort of closing remark, and then we'll finish
up. Thank you, Hone. Appreciate it. Everyone, thank you for joining us. We wanted this to be a very quick briefing and an update to engage the community, because the developments in Ethiopia are happening pretty quickly in terms of the success that the Fanos are having in the fight against Abiy military and administering several of these areas. And this is something we are constantly communicating to, diplomats that we have communication with, as well as journalists, so that there can be proper coverage. As one of the speakers said earlier, their reconfiguration of countries, regions, is something that happens with regularity. And this is something that as a community we have to be engaged in, so that we have an influence in the outcome of what happens, not only in Ethiopia, but also the region. Our people are facing a genocide, ethnic cleansing. So it's incumbent on us to be engaged. One of the things that's really very heartening to see is just how quickly and how fast the Amhara movement is growing. I was at the Ethiopian Sports Federation in North America, or ESFNA, in Dallas, Texas, and it was incredible to see the level of engagement, of all ages, with our organizations that were represented there, in terms of coming to the conference, to the meetings, to the tents, and being very supportive. The Amara movement now is a global movement, and this whole force, this whole muscle, is engaged to stopping this genocide. The Ethiopian political dynamics changed completely once Amaras began organizing in 2016. And if you look at the political discourse of Ethiopia, it is almost essentially everything is almost essentially related to Amharas. So that means that we have to be engaged, we have to be active, so that we have full control and of the future of Amharas, and also really Ethiopia, and also be part of the process in the region. The diplomats who are engaged, who are engaged in Ethiopia, have come to the understanding that this we are a people and we are a force that can be excluded, or that can be where they can are disengaged, and this is something positive because we were not part of the process in the past. So what we're asking you to do is please continue to be engaged in every kind of way. For those of you, especially here in the U.S., the 2024 election is coming up. Please be engaged in this process. Candidates are going to be having forums. Candidates are going to be engaging the community. Constituents. Please go out there, meet with these candidates, speak to them, communicate with them. What was really incredible to see, 2 weeks ago in San Diego, when at the Ethiopian, diaspora peace conference, to see so many Amharas come out to the University of California in San Diego and challenge, Hammer and the other speakers about what's happening in Ethiopia. This is not something now that the conversation about Ethiopia is not something that can be done without engaging Amaras, and proud and thankful to Robel for flying out there on such a short notice from Toronto to represent the Amhara community and also lead our delegation in the private discussion that he had, that he participated in or partook with the senior U.S. Government officials in that private discussion. But it just shows that we're engaged in this process. We need to continue to be engaged, so we can take really it's have sovereignty in terms of like the our own future is something that people have taken advantage of for a very long time. That's no longer happening. So with that said, thank you for joining us. We look forward to engaging you in the future, and also continue to be giving you an update. There's a few reports that we're going to be releasing in terms of like human rights atrocities that have been committed over the past few months by Abiy's military in Amhara region, and we hope you take these reports and use those as a way to engage non-Ethiopians and educate them. Thank you.
I guess that will be the end of this session today. Thank you again, everyone. We'll close it up now.
Thank you, everyone.